So, good morning, everyone. My name is Arafat, and I teach history on the textbook platform. So, in this session, let us discuss a very, very important topic of uh, ancient Indian history, that is the debate relating to the original home of the Aryans. Debate on the original home of the Aryans. So this topic is very, very important. Many times questions were asked, particularly uh, questions were asked in the UPSC examination, particularly in the prelims stage of the UPSC examination. So this topic is very, very important. So let us understand few details relating to this topic. Okay, point. So before we discuss the debate on the original home of the Aryans, let us understand the meaning of the term Aryan. Let us understand the meaning of the term Aryan. Generally, we use the term Aryan in sense of a race or in the sense of people belonging to a particular race. But such a description is a wrong description. So basically, Aryan is not a term which is used to refer to people belonging to a particular race. Essentially, the term Aryan is a linguistic term. Aryan is basically a linguistic term, and the term Aryan is used to refer to people who speak a language belonging to the Indo-Aryan language family or Indo-European language family. So let me repeat this point once again. Who are Aryans? The term Aryan is a linguistic term. It has nothing to do with people belonging to a particular race. In fact, Aryan is a linguistic term, and this term is used to refer to people who speak language belonging to Indo-European language family. So, for example, let me clarify, let me elaborate on this point further. We use the term Dravidian. We frequently use the term Dravidian to refer to the South Indian people, the people of South India. But this Dravidian is not a term which is used to refer to people belonging to a particular race. In fact, like Aryan, Dravidian is also a linguistic term. Is also a linguistic term. Dravidian is a term which is used to refer to people who speak a language belonging to Dravidian family. Dravidian family. So basically, the term Dravidian is used to refer to people who speak language belonging to Dravidian family. So, for example, the four major languages spoken in south of India belong to Dravidian language family. So, for example, Tamil. The second is say Telugu, and third is say Kannada, and fourth is say Malayalam. These are the four prominent languages spoken in South India, and these four put together are referred to as languages belonging to Dravidian language family. So basically, when we use the term Dravidian, we are referring to people who speak a language belonging to the Dravidian family. And similarly, when we use the term Aryan, we refer to people who speak a language belonging to Indo-European language family. So what is this Indo-European language family? Let us spend some time and understand on this point as well. So what is this Indo-European language? So scholars believe that there existed or there used to exist a language called Indo-European language. It is basically the language which was spoken during the ancient times. And scholars believe that this Indo-European language split into two parts. One is the European branch, The other is the Indo-Iranian branch. The Indo-Iranian branch. So scholars say that this European branch of the Indo-European language family further split into two, that is Greek and Latin. And it is from these languages, that is, it is from either Greek or Latin that the present spoken languages of Europe had come into existence. Basically, it is either from Greek or from Latin that the present day spoken languages of Europe had come into existence. Say, for example, English. Say, for example, German. Say, for example, say Spanish. Say, for example, say Italian. All of these languages have come into existence either from Greek or Latin. So the point is, this European language, the mother of these present European languages, that is Greek and Latin, are said to have derived from Indo-European language family. So basically, this Indo-European language family, which was once upon a time spoken uh, by by the people, this language is split into two. One is European branch, the other is Indo-Iranian branch. So this Indo-Iranian branch developed in present day Persia, present day Iran. Indo-Iranian branch developed in present day Iran, which is also called as Persia. And in course of time, it is from the Indo-Iranian branch developed another language called Indo-Aryan language. From Indo-Iranian branch developed another language called Indo-Aryan language. And this Indo-Aryan language evolved in three phases. First phase is Old Indo-Aryan. The second phase is Middle Indo-Aryan. Third is Modern Indo-Aryan. So let us spend time discussing about this Indo-Aryan language. I told you this Indo-Aryan language evolved in three phases: Old Indo-Aryan, Middle Indo-Aryan, and Modern Indo-Aryan. So the point is, it is in the Old Indo-Aryan. So the point is, the language that developed first. So under the Old Indo-Aryan language category falls Sanskrit. Repeat, under the Old Indo-Aryan language category falls Sanskrit. So it was in this language that the Vedas were composed. The Vedic texts were composed. That's the point. So this Indo-Aryan language, it in course of time evolved in three phases. The first phase is the Old Indo-Aryan. So Sanskrit essentially belongs to the Old Indo-Aryan language category. So it was in this Sanskrit language that Vedic texts were written. And similarly, in the Middle Indo-Aryan category falls a couple of languages such as Pali, Prakrit, Ardhamagadhi, and Apabhramsha. Pali, Prakrit, Ardhamagadhi, and Apabhramsha. So basically, uh, this Pali was used extensively for the composition of Buddhist text. So basically, Buddhism also took its birth in India. Buddhism emerged around 600 BC. So Buddha mostly preached in Pali language, and the Buddhist texts were also composed in this language. At the point. So basically, Pali also derived out of Sanskrit only, but Pali or the Middle Indo-Aryan languages were easier to pronounce. The words of the Middle Indo-Aryan language were easier to pronounce. Therefore, the Middle Indo-Aryan languages became the languages of the masses. Common people spoke in these languages, such as say Pali, Prakrit, Ardhamagadhi, Apabhramsha, etc. So this Prakrit and Ardhamagadhi were extensively used by the Jains for composing the text relating to Jainism. So basically, Jain texts were written in this particular language, Prakrit and Ardhamagad. I already told you this Middle Indo-Aryan languages, the words of the Middle Indo-Aryan languages are easier to pronounce, and therefore these Middle Indo-Aryan languages uh, became the languages of the common people, whereas the Sanskrit was confined to the elite sections of the society. So mostly Brahmins conversed in Sanskrit, whereas the other sections of the Indian society mostly converged in uh, the Middle Indo-Aryan languages. It is Pali, Prakrit, Ardhamagadhi, and Apabhramsh. Then we have the modern Indo-Aryan language. So the present day spoken languages of north, east, and part of India. The present day spoken languages of north, east, and western part of India largely derived out of the modern Indo-Aryan language family. The modern Indo-Aryan language family. So, for example, Assamese, Bengali, Gujarati, Hindi, all these falls under modern Indo-Aryan language category. I hope I am clear. So, the whole point which I'm trying to convey is there are numerous language families in India, but the two prominent language families in India, one is the Indo-Aryan language family, and second is the Dravidian language family. So now come to the point. Now let us understand the meaning of the term Aryan. So what is Aryan? Who are Aryans? Aryan is basically a linguistic term, and this term is used to refer to people, it can be anyone, is used to refer to people who spoke a language belonging to Indo-European language family. So this is basically the Indo-European language family. So whosoever speaks whichsoever language belonging to this Indo-European language family can be called as Aryans. Can be called as Aryans. Could be the Europeans. It could also be the Indo-Iranians. It could also be the Indo-Aryans. Anyone who speaks any of the language belonging to this Indo-European language family can be called as Aryan. So it was in that sense that Aryan came to be used. That's the point. So now come to the topic of today's discussion, the original home of the Aryans. Who are these Aryans? What is their original home? And this is the debate. So before we discuss this debate, let me uh, take you back in time period. So basically, the Indian history, for example, say in ancient Indian history, we start our discussion with the Stone Age, Stone Age, and the second chapter of ancient Indian history is we have the Indus Valley civilization, the Indus Valley civilization, or the Harappan civilization. Harappan civilization. The time period of this Indus Valley civilization or Harappan civilization is around 2600 BCE to around 1900. That's the time period of the Harappan civilization. So we start our history discussion uh, from Stone Age, and the second chapter of ancient Indian history is Indus Valley civilization. The third topic is we have Vedic civilization, otherwise also called as Aryan civilization. Aryan civilization, time period of the Vedic civilization is say roughly 1500 BC to around 6. That's the time period of Vedic civilization. So the point is The topic of today's discussion is the original home of the Aryans. Who are these Aryans? Where did they come? So you basically understand the three chapters of ancient Indian history, and now come back to our discussion. So basically, the scholars are divided their opinion relating to the original home of the Aryans. To repeat, the scholars are divided in their opinion on the question of the original home of the Aryans. So basically we have two categories of theories dealing with the question of the original home of the Aryans. One category of scholars argue that Aryans are very much the natives of India, and they came up with numerous theories. All of these theories put together are referred to as indigenous origin theories. So we have a group of scholars who argue that the Aryans are very much the natives of India, and all of their theories put together are referred to as indigenous origin theories. On the other hand, we have another group of scholars who argue that perhaps the Aryans came and settled in India from outside, from other regions of the world. So all of their theories put together are referred to as the foreign origin theories. So let me repeat this point once again. The scholars are divided their opinion on the question of the original home of the Aryans, and these theories can broadly be divided into categories. One is the indigenous origin theory, and is the foreign origin theory. Let us get into the details of both of these categories of theories. Let us get into this theory. First, let us discuss the indigenous origin theories. The indigenous origin theory point. So we don't have to go into the details of not very important, but we should know the essence of all of these theories. Let us understand these theories. So the first theory is the theory of Sapta Sindhu region. The theory of Sapta Sindhu region. This theory, basically, we are now discussing the indigenous origin theory. All of these theories advocated Aryans as the natives of India. Basically, all of these theories advocated Aryans as the natives of India. So let us take a look at these theories one after the other. The first theory is the Sapta Sindhu region theory. So this theory was advocated by two scholars. One is A.C. Das and Sampurnanand. A.C. Das and Sampurnanand. So Das and Sampurnanand argued that Sapta Sindhu region was in fact the original home of the Aryans. The Sapta Sindhu region was original home of the Aryans was the argument presented by A.C. Das and Sampurnanand. So why did they come to this conclusion? This is because in the Vedic text, so we frequently come across a term called Sapta Sindhava. The Vedic text, let me once again take you back and explain one more point. So take a look at the three, the three chapters of ancient history. First is we start our history discussion with Stone Age. Second is Indus Valley. Third is Vedic civilization, also called as Aryan civilization. So it is widely believed that the Vedas were composed by the Aryans. It is widely believed and it is widely accepted in the academic circles that the Vedas were composed by the Aryans, Sanskrit language. It is widely accepted in the academic circles that these Vedas were composed between 1500 BC to about 6 BC time period. Vedic text, most of the scholars believe that the Vedic texts were composed by the Aryans in Sanskrit language, and they were composed between 1500 to 600 BC time period. Now come back to our discussion. So basically, in the Vedic text, we frequently come across a term called Sapta Sindhava. The Vedic text, we frequently come across a term called Sapta Sindhava. So the Sapta Sindhava has been identified, the Sapta Sindhava has been identified with region where 7 rivers flow. The 7 rivers being, one is Indus, that is Sindhu, and 5 tributaries of Indus, and third is we have river Saraswati. River Saraswati. So basically, in the Vedic text, particularly in Rig Veda, we frequently come across a term called Sapta Sindhava. The Sapta Sindhava has been identified with Sindhu or Indus, 5 tributaries of Indus, plus river Saraswati, plus river Saraswati. So all these put together, they account for 7 rivers. So basically, since the term Sapta Sindhava was frequently mentioned in Veda, A.C. Das and Sampurnanand argued that perhaps the Sapta Sindhava region is the region where these 7 rivers were flowing, constitute the original home of the Aryans. Constitute the original home of the Aryans. This was an argument presented by A.C. Das and Sampurna. At a point. Then we have another theory proposed by a scholar by name L.D. Kalla, another indigenous theory proposed by L.D. Kalla, and he argued that perhaps the Kashmir Himalayas perhaps was the original home of the Aryans. Thus, the point is he came to this conclusion on the basis of the geographical description in Rig Veda. So basically, L.D. Kalla, uh, after analyzing the geographical description mentioned in Rig Veda, came to the conclusion that perhaps the Kashmir Himalayan region perhaps was the original home of the Aryans. At a point. So this was the conclusion to which he came. Third, we have is another scholar by name Ganganath Jha. Ganganath Jha. So in Rig Veda, there is a frequent mention of a term called Brahmarishi Desha. Brahmarishi Desha. This term is also frequently mentioned in Rig Veda. So Ganganath Jha has identified this Brahmarishi Desha as a region between river Saraswati and river Drishadvati. River Saraswati and river Drishadvati. So basically, this Brahmarishi Desha, the point is this Drishadvati was once upon a time flowing in Haryana. Similarly, Saraswati River was also flowing in Haryana, Punjab, Gujarat, and Rajasthan. But Saraswati, particularly, is not an active river in the present times. Saraswati River has now dried up, but it's once upon a time it was a very active river. So basically, Ganganath Jha argued that Brahmarishi Desha perhaps was the original home of the Aryans. At a point. So what is this Brahmarishi Desha? He identified the region between river Saraswati and Drishadvati as Brahmarishi Desha. So basically, it is a region where Kurukshetra is also said to have fought. So it is also the region which finds mentioned in Mahabharata, the Brahmarishi Desha. So Ganganath Jha basically argued that perhaps the parts of Punjab, Haryana constitute the original home of the Aryans. Thus, he came to this conclusion because the term Brahmarishi Desha is also frequently mentioned in Rig Veda and other Vedic texts. That's the point. So the fourth theory was proposed by a scholar by name D.S. Trivedi, and he argued that perhaps Devika region was the original home of the Aryans. Devika. So Devika region is basically a region which is now spread in Multan and Sindh regions of Pakistan. So back in those days, the Multan Sindh regions was referred to as they were referred to Devika region. The point. So he argued that perhaps this Devika region constitute the original home of the Aryans. That's the point. So the point which I'm trying to convey is scholars are divided in their opinion over the question of the original home of the Aryans. And these opinions can broadly be divided into two categories. One is we call as indigenous origin theories. Second, we call it as the foreign origin theories. What we discussed so far are basically different indigenous origin theories. But the point is, scholars, the majority of the scholars of the present time have rejected the above discussed indigenous origin theories. Basically, the present a majority, not one, two, a majority of the present scholars have rejected the above discussed indigenous origin because uh, these theories uh, failed to provide uh, additional evidence in support of all of their theories. So Asidas, Sampurnanand, Kalla, Ganganath Jha, D.S. Trivedi, though they propose their theories, they are not adequately backed by evidence, archaeological evidence, genetic. What theories which we discussed so far are basically not accepted by a majority of the scholars of the present times because they are not adequately supported by other evidence, such as say they do not support the linguistic evidence, they do not even support genetic evidence, they also do not support archaeological. Therefore, all of these theories which we discussed so far have been rejected by a majority of the scholars of the present time. Come to the foreign origin theories. So many scholars, in fact, presented this argument. Take a look at these arguments, these theories. We have Dr. Penka, scholar by name Penka, who argued that perhaps Germany was the original home of the Aryans. Basically, he argued that Germany was perhaps the original home of the Aryans. Why did he come to that conclusion? He came to that conclusion because he found similarities between Sanskrit and Germanic or German. So basically, Dr. Penka studied both Sanskrit and German. He found linguistic similarities between both of these languages, Sanskrit and German. Therefore, he came to this conclusion. But the point is, even this theory, Dr. Penka's theory, is not accepted by a majority of the scholars of the present times. Not accepted. At a point. So, because his theory do not throw additional evidence, basically it does not confirm to, it does not provide additional linguistic, archaeological and other evidence. So basically this theory of Dr. Penka is also not accepted. Then we have Dayananda Saraswati, the 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 founder of Arya Samaj. So Dayananda Saraswati argued that perhaps the Tibet region was the original home of the Aryans. So basically, he came to this conclusion as have evidence to prove that there were strong cultural ties between India and Tibet, and therefore, Dayananda Saraswati came to the conclusion that perhaps Aryans came and settled in India from the Tibet region. He argued Tibet to be the original home of the Aryans. But even this theory of Dayananda Saraswati is not accepted by a majority of the scholars. Is not accepted because uh, does not. So point is uh, majority of the scholars have rejected this theory as well because it does not provide additional evidence in support of this particular. Then we have Bala Gangadhar Tilak, another individual, and he came with the Arctic region. So basically, Tilak argued that perhaps Arctic region was the original home of the Aryans. They came to this conclusion after reading Rigveda, uh, which suggests that the authors of Rigveda lived in a region where the duration of the day and the duration of the night is very, very long. Basically, Tilaka came to this conclusion uh, because in Rigveda, we get a sense that those who wrote Rigveda lived in a region where there were long days and long nights. So generally, we see this phenomena around the Arctic region, and therefore, on the basis of his reading of Rigveda, uh, Tilak came to the conclusion that perhaps Arctic region constitute the original home of the Aryans. Similarly, but the point is, even this theory of Tilak has been rejected by a majority of the scholars. Then fourth we have is the theory proposed by Professor Giles and MacDonald. They proposed the Austro-Hungarian region as the original home of the Aryan. But this theory has also been rejected by the scholars. So the point is, most of the indigenous origin theories have been rejected by the scholars. And many of the foreign origin theories have also been rejected by scholars. Come to the last and the very, very important theory proposed by a scholar by name Max Muller. Max Muller. He proposed a theory called the Central Asian theory. Proposed a theory called the Central Asian theory. So the point is, this theory, the Central Asian theory, is the most and widely accepted theory relating to the original home of the Aryans. So this theory at present is the most widely accepted theory because evidence point to that point is the evidence which is available with us now points that perhaps the Aryans originally were the inhabitants of Central Asia. At a point. So let us understand this Central Asian theory proposed by Max Muller. Basically, Max Muller argued that till 3000 BC, till 3000 BC, the the original or the Aryans lived in the Central Asian steppe region. This is basically the Central Asian steppe region. So basically, Max Muller argued that till 3000 BC time period, the Aryans lived in the Central Asian steppe region, and thereafterwards, uh, Max Muller argued that these Aryans started migrating in different directions. So some people went and settled in Europe. So basically, Greek, Latin, all of these languages were developed. So till 3000 BC, the Aryans lived in the Central Asian steppe region. And thereafterwards, he argued that these Aryans started migrating in different directions. He argued that the Aryans kept migrating because they happened to be nomadic people. Nomadic people. They were nomads, so they were mostly dependent on their cattle for their survival, and therefore, along with their cattle, they kept migrating to different regions. But he argued that originally the Aryans lived in the Central Asian steppe region. At a point, so around Caspian Sea was the region was the original the region around Caspian Sea in Central Asia, according to Max Muller, was the original home of the Aryans. I told you from 3000 BC onward, these Aryans started migrating in different directions. One group went and settled in Europe. There, this group developed new languages such as Latin and Greek. And it is from Latin and Greek the present spoken languages of Europe had come into existence. Another group migrated from the same Central Asian steppe region, settled in Iran. Another group migrated from the same Central Asian steppe region and settled in Iran, where it developed a language known as Persian. it developed a new language called Persian. Another group also started migrating from the same Central Asian steppe region, migrated and came settled in India. And this happened around 15. This happened around 15. And this group which came and settled in India developed a new language called Sanskrit. So basically, what all argument I am presenting? I am presenting the arguments of Max Muller. So basically, Max Muller argued that till 3000 BC, the Aryans lived in the central steppe region, and thereafterwards they started migrating in different directions. They started migrating in different directions because they happened to be a nomadic people. One group went and settled in Europe, where it developed languages as Latin and Greek. Another group went and settled in Iran, where it developed a language called Persian. And another group came and settled in India, where this group developed a language called Sanskrit. And this was the argument presented by Max Muller. But how did he come to this conclusion? So, what evidence did Max Muller present in favor of his theory? Let us take a look at the evidence. So, Max Muller basically presented this theory on the basis of two evidence. Max Muller presented this Central Asian theory on the basis of essentially two evidence. One is we have an inscriptional evidence, and second is we have the philological evidence. So basically, Max Muller presented his theory on the basis of two evidences. One is the inscriptional evidence. So basically, two inscriptions of the ancient times were discovered. So two inscriptions of the ancient time period have been discovered. One is we call as the Kassite inscription. At a point. So these Kassites are basically the inhabitants of present day Iraq. So the Kassite ruled present day Iraq in 1600 BC time period. So they issued an inscription called Kassite inscription belonging to 1600 period. This Kassite inscription contains the names of few gods who it contains names of a few gods, and those names have a striking resemblance to the gods, the names of the gods mentioned in the Vedic texts. Let me repeat this point once again. So the point is, Kassites, I told you, Kassite are basically the people who ruled present day Iraq in 1600 time period. They issued an inscription called Kassite inscription belonging to this Kassite inscription contains names of gods. At a point, the names of gods, and it also contains names of individuals. And these names of gods mentioned this Kassite inscription have close similarities with the names of gods in the Vedic text. For example, say in this inscription, the names of the gods mentioned are Suryash, Maruttash, etc. Suryash, Maruttas, etc. And basically, this Suryash has a close resemblance to the term Surya. Surya is a god. Maruts, these are the god of storm, is Aryan. Maruts are the gods of storm. So basically, Surya and Maruts are Vedic gods because they are mentioned in the Vedic texts. But you also see similar names being used for gods by the Kassites. So basically, the similarity of basically Max Muller argued that this similarity in the names of the gods existed because the ancestors of both of these groups perhaps one and the same people. So basically, Max Muller argued that the Kassites and perhaps the Aryans had common ancestors. That was the argument. Since the ancestors of both of these groups were one and the same, so though they migrated to two different, they continued to worship the same gods, was the argument presented by Max Muller. So originally, Max Muller argued that originally people, Aryans lived in India and they began migrating to directions. Even though they migrated to different directions, they continued to worship the same gods, and that's the reason why we see similarities in the gods. Is the argument presented by Max Muller. I hope I am clear. So the point is, Max Muller presented two evidence in support of two evidence. One is an inscriptional evidence. That's the point. Second, he proposed philological evidence also in support of his. So, what is philology? Philology is basically study of ancient languages, or you can say a comparative study of the ancient languages. So, basically, philology deals with the study of ancient languages, and the study was undertaken with a view to establish similarities or dissimilarities between those ancient languages. Philology is basically study of ancient languages. The study was conducted with a view to establish similarities or dissimilarities between those ancient languages. So, in fact, in the 16th century AD itself, there was a philologist by name Salsetti, Filippo Salsetti. He undertook a comparative study of ancient languages, such as, say, uh, European languages, Persian, as well as Sanskrit. And to his surprise, he found that many of the words belonging to these languages are quite similar. Let me repeat this point once again. In 16th century itself, an Italian philologist by name Filippo Salsetti uh, undertook a comparative study of ancient languages, such as, say, Greek he studied, Latin he studied, then he studied English he studied, he also studied Persian, he also studied Sanskrit. And to his surprise, he began to find hundreds and hundreds of words uh, with who which are similar sounding in nature, similar sounds. So, for example, take a look at this example. So, this initial study, the philological study, was undertaken by Philippus Salsetti, but Max Muller started using this philological evidence to argue. This philological study was carried out by Salsetti, but Max Muller started using this philological studies as evidence to argue that perhaps these uh, all of these languages have similar sounding words because the the ancestors of all of these people were one and the same. At a point. So basically, Max Muller argued that there exists such great similarity in all of these words of all of these different languages because of their common ancestry. That was the argument presented by Max Muller. Take a look at this study, philological study carried out by Filippo Salsetti. So, for example, in English, we have a word called donation. Donation is making gift. At a point. In Sanskrit, it is called dana. In Latin, it is called donum. Called don. Sanskrit, it is called donum. So basically, why should this in both of these languages, the word starts with the same letter, that is D. Dana, donum. They also have similar. They are basically similar sounding words. And say, for example, soul. In Sanskrit, it is called Atman or Atma. In Latin, it is called anima. Why should it start only with the A and should have same sound and with same meanings? Fire, say for example, in Sanskrit it is called Agni, The point is, it is from Latin only English came into. But the whole point which I'm trying to convey is fire is an English word, but it derived from Latin word called ignis. But this ignis, fire in Sanskrit is called Agni, but in Latin it is called ignis. Up to point. So basically, Agni and ignis also are similar sounding words. So man, English. So in Sanskrit, called Vira or Veer. In Latin also it is called Veer. So for example, mother. In Sanskrit it is Matra. In Latin it is Mater. Then father. Pitra in Sanskrit, Pater in Latin. Gods. In Sanskrit it is Dev or Deva. In Latin it is Zeus. At the point. So the whole point is this Filippo Salcetti studied all of these different languages, and to his surprise, he found that words of thousands of words of these different languages have similar sounding words. At the point. So take a look at another example. To call mother English, in Sanskrit it is matra, in Persian and Latin it is mater, German it is mater, in Greek it is mitor. So don't you see that all of these words have a similar sounding words? All of these words are basically similar sounding. So the point is, Max Muller argued that we see such similarities in all of these words because of the common ancestry of the speakers of all of these languages. Basically, Max Muller argued that we see such great similarity in all of these words because of the common similarity, common ancestry of the speakers of all of these. Basically argued that the ancestors of the speakers of English language, Sanskrit language, Persian and Latin, German, Greek are one and the same. That's the reason why he argued we see such great similarity in all of these languages. And this was the evidence presented by Max Muller in support of his theory. Just a minute. So that's the theory proposed by Max Muller. So basically, Max Muller came up with a theory called central Asian theory. In support of his theory, he presented both inscriptional evidence. He also presented this philological evidence. Logic, that was the evidence presented by him. So as soon as this theory was presented, this theory generated a lot of interest among other scholars, and in turn, the other scholars also started undertaking research on the central theory. To their surprise, they began coming up with even more evidence that supported the Central Asian theory proposed by Max Muller. Basically, Max Muller proposed Central Asian theory, and when he proposed this theory, he only proposed a few evidence. But in course of time, other scholars also got interested in this theory of Max Muller. They began carrying out more research on it, and their research began to throw even more light uh, in support of the Central Asian theory. Up to point. Now let us understand the evidence presented by other groups of scholars or other scholars which also support the Central Asian origin of the Aryans. The Central Asian origin of the Aryans. Up to point. So take a look at the evidence present by other groups of scholars. So basically, we have the ancient most texts entire world. One is Rig Veda. So this Rig Veda was composed in 1500 BC, composed in India, composed in Sanskrit. So Rig Veda composed in 1500 BC, composed in India, it was composed in Sanskrit language. Then we have another text called Avesta or Zend Avesta. So basically, this text was composed roughly around 1000 period. It was composed in present day Persia or Iran. So it was composed in in Persian language, composed in Persian language. So basically, the Zend Avesta is the most sacred text of Zoroastrian. Zoroastrian. Avesta is basically the most sacred text of Zoroastrian. So Zoroastrians, it's a religious community once lived in Iran at a point. More now, but they once were uh, uh, the religion once upon a time in Iran. So the most sacred text of Zoroastrian religion is Zend Avesta. So basically written in 1000 BC. In Iran, it was written in Persian language. Then we have Homeric texts. These were composed around 900 BC, composed by epic writer by name Homer. There is an epic writer by name Homer who is said to have composed two texts. One is Odyssey, other is Iliad. Other book is Iliad. So both are basically the epics like Ramayana and Mahabharata, which are epics. Odyssey and Iliad happen to be the epics of Europe. Both are said to have been composed by the same individual, that is Homer. He composed them in 900 BC, composed them in present day Greece, and he composed them in Greek language. The language in which he composed these texts was Greek. He composed them in Europe, in Greece. The names of the books are Odyssey and Iliad, composed around 900. And you know Zend Avesta, you know Rig Veda. So basically, these texts which I have discussed with you are supposed to be one of the ancient most texts in the entire world. They are supposed to be the ancient most texts in the entire world. These texts were composed in three different parts of the world: Rigveda in India, Dandavesta in Iran, and the Homeric text in Europe. They were composed in three different parts of the. They were composed in three different periods of time, and they were composed in three different languages: Rigveda in Sanskrit, Zendavesta in Persian, but Homeric text in Greek language. The point is, these three texts believed to contain evidence of Aryan migration. They throw light on Aryan. They certainly throw light on Aryan at a point. Now let us understand the slide which I am going to discuss with you is perhaps very important to pay attention to this part. So basically, initially, uh, Max Muller presented this theory with only linguistic evidence. Mostly, Max Muller proposed his theory on the basis of linguistic evidence, mostly. But the theory of Max Muller generated a lot of interest. Other group of scholars also began undertaking research, and their research began to show more evidence in support of the Central Asian theory proposed by Max Muller. So the evidence which I am going to discuss with you is the evidence presented by other group of scholars, not by Max Muller. At a point. And the other group of scholars have presented this evidence after going through Rigveda, Zendavesta, and Homeric text. So basically, these three texts throw light on the migration of Aryans from Central. Basically, they throw light on Aryan culture. These three texts, though they were written in three different parts of the world at three different points of time and three different languages, yet one thing which they have common is that they contain some evidence of Aryans being the original inhabitants, originally being from Central Asia, they throw light on the migration of Aryans from Central Asia. That's the point. Take a look at these three texts and take a look at the evidence which I am going to discuss with you. Take the evidence of Hars. So basically, I already told you that the second chapter of ancient Indian history is Indus Valley Civilization. The time period of Indus is 2600 BC to 19 point. And Vedic period started from 1500 to about 6. So it was during Vedic period that Rig Veda was written. So take a look at this. Zend-Avesta, you know when it was written. Homeric text, you know when it was written. So the point is, take a look at all of these evidences which I will be discussing with you. Take a look at the evidence of Hars. So the point is many scholars believe that horse was introduced in India from around 1500 BC time period. So the whole point which I'm trying to convey is many scholars believe that horse, the animal horse, was introduced into India around 1500 point. So we have evidence to prove that whatever horse bones that have been discovered in India so far date to around 1500 BC or to later day time period and not to before 1500 BC time period. So whatever horse remains that have been discovered from various sites yeah, uh, belong to either 1500 BC or to later day time period and not before. At a point. So what does it indicate to? So basically, let me repeat this point once again. Horse. The first evidence of Aryan migration is horse. First evidence of Aryan migration is horse. Because the point is, we clearly have some evidence to prove that the people of Indus Valley civilization who lived in India between 2600 to 19 were not aware of horse. They are not aware of horse. How about Rig Veda? When you read Rig Veda, it becomes very clear that the authors of Rig Veda were definitely aware of horse. They were definitely aware of horse. Then, when you read Zend-Avesta text written in Iran, it becomes very clear that the authors of Zend-Avesta also were aware of this animal called horse. How about Homeric text? The Homeric texts also indicate that the author of Homeric text, that is Homer, was also aware of horse. So one thing which we find common in these three texts is the three texts contain evidence. The point these three texts it is indicated that the authors of these three texts were definitely aware of this at a point. But the point is now research indicate that horse is an animal which was originally domesticated in Central Asia. Like, so for example, we have kangaroo, which are basically native to Australia. Not all the animals are found in all parts of the I hope I am clear. For example, horse, animal, is believed to have been originally domesticated in Central Asia. So basically, Central Asian people were definitely aware of horse because that horse originally is believed to have been domesticated in that region only. But the point is, in Rig Veda, we have reference to numerous animals. Rig Veda, there are reference to numerous animals, but the one animal is referred to the largest number of times in Rig Veda is none other than horse. So basically, horse is mentioned in Rig Veda 250 times. Whereas cow is also mentioned in Rig Veda, but it is mentioned only 176 times. Cow is also very, very sacred for the Hindus. But the point is, cow was mentioned only 176 times, whereas horse was mentioned in Rig Veda for about 200 times. And I already told you that Rig Veda was written in India, written in Sanskrit. If that be the case, why did the authors of Rig Veda mention about an animal for such a large number of times, which is an animal which is not native to India? So basically, horse is not native to India. It was originally domesticated in India, but the authors of Rig Veda mentions horse the largest number of times. All the animals mentioned in Veda, horse was mentioned largest. And similar is the case in Zend-Avesta and Homeric text. So Zend-Avesta was written in Iran, Homeric text in Greece. So, but in all of these texts, what is common is the reference to horse. Large number of references to horse is one common element which we find in these. So why did they mention horse for such large number of times? Because possibly the 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 ancestors of the authors of these three books had great regard for hearts, because the ancestors of the authors of these three books came from Central Asia, so where the horse was in fact domestic. That's the point. So, but how about the evidence of horse in India after 1500 BC? We do get evidence of horse in India after 1500 BC, that is after the arrival of Aryans in India from around 1500. So before 1500 BC, say this is time scale. So this is 1500 BC. This is say 2000, say 3000. Talking about the time scale. This is say 1000, 1600 BC. So from 1500 BC onwards, we get evidence of horse in India, not before. So before 1500 BC, we do not get any evidence of horse, but after 1500 in India. That be the case. Who introduced this horse in India? Possibly people who came from Central Asia came with horse. The people who came from Central Asia came to India along with the horse and introduced horse into. At a point. So horse is very, very, very. Second is spoked wheel. So we now have very uh, clear evidence to prove that the people of Indus Valley civilization were not aware of spoked wheel. Wheel was used by the Indus Valley people, but they were not aware of spoked wheel. The wheel which they used was a solid wheel. This is basically a toy discovered from Indus Valley civilization. So this is basically a toy bullock cart. So this toy bullock cart clearly indicates that the wheel of this bullock cart had a solid wheel, not a spoked wheel. Not spoked wheel. At a point. So basically, it very clearly knows now. We clearly know now that Indus people were not possibly aware of a spoked wheel, but we clearly know that the authors of Rig Veda, the authors of Zend-Avesta and Homeric text were definitely aware of spoked wheel. So basically, in Zend-Avesta, in Rig Veda, in Homeric text, there is a frequent mention of chariots driven by chariots who had spoked wheel. So basically, the authors of Rig Veda, Zend-Avesta text were definitely aware of spoked wheels, which was not known to the people of Indus Valley civilization. But from around 1500 BC onwards, we get to see the evidence of use of spoked wheel in India. From around 1500 BC onwards, we get to see the evidence of the use of spoked wheel in India. That be the case, who introduced this spoked wheel? Possibly the Aryans were the one who introduced. But how do we say so? Because it is believed that wheel, spoked wheel, first began to be used in Central Asia around 2300. We now have evidence to prove that spoked wheel originally began to be used in Central Asia around 2300, and we know for sure that the authors of Rigveda Avesta text are also aware of a spoked wheel. We also get to see the evidence of spoked wheel in India after 15 and not before. So if that be the case, who introduced the spoked wheel in India? Possibly the Aryans who came to India around 1500 BC introduced wheel into India. Take the case of cremation. Cremation, basically, people of different cultures uh, dispose their dead in different ways. So, for example, cremation. Cremation is a method of disposal of the dead. But the point is, Indus people, now the evidence suggests that the people of Indus Valley did not cremate their dead, they buried their dead. Burial was the dominant method of disposal of the dead during the Indus. But Rigveda advocates cremation, Zendavesta also advocates cremation, Homeric texts also advocate cremation. And we get evidence of cremation becoming the dominant method of disposal of the dead from 1500. So from 1500 BC onwards, uh, cremation became the dominant method of dead. But this method of disposal of the dead was not practiced in Indus Valley civilization. So if that be the case, who introduced this new culture, new trait, new tradition? Point is, perhaps this tradition was introduced into India by the Aryans who came from. Then in in Rigveda there is a mention of a ritual drink called Soma, and in Avesta there is also a mention of a ritual drink called Havoma. So you can see the names of both of these ritual drinks are similar sounding, Soma and Homa. Both happen to be ritual drinks. Both in Rigveda, when you read Rigveda and when you read Zendavesta, you get to know that these drinks were consumed during important religious occasions, Soma and Homa. Of course, we don't get to hear about such a drink in Homeric text, but we get to hear about such drinks in both Rigveda and Zendavesta. Both were consumed during important religious occasions. That's the point. So the mention of these drinks in both of these texts, Rigveda and Avesta, indicate to their common ancestry. So they mentioned this drink in both of these texts. Is the authors of Rigveda and authors of Zendavesta mentioned about this drink in their respective texts, possibly because it was uh, this tradition was practiced by them, and this tradition existed. Basically it points to the common ancestor at a point. The ancestors of both of these people perhaps were the same. They were perhaps indulging in this equal drink. Therefore these people also mention about those. Of course we don't get any evidence of such thing after. We only have this textual evidence and not archaeological evidence. Then fire worship. So fire worship is not so much prominent during the Indus Valley period, whereas it became a very important method of worship, and it is reflected in Rigveda, Zendavesta, and Homeric. So fire worship was not dominant or important during Indus Valley period, but when you read Rigveda, Zendavesta, and Homeric text, it becomes very clear that for the people for the authors of Rigveda, Zendavesta, and Homeric texts, fire worship was very, very important. So, but we do get evidence of fire worship being continued in India after 1500 as well. That be the case. Who introduced this method of worship in India? Point is, perhaps it was introduced by the other important. Then finally, we have one more evidence, that is genetic evidence. So the point is genes get transmitted from one generation to another generation. So the scholars have identified a distinct gene among the Central Asian people called M17. So the scholars, the geneticists, have identified distinct gene prevailing among the Central Asian people called M17. So the point is, the same gene M17 was found existing among this gene M17 was found existing among 40% people of Central Asia. This M17 gene was found existing among 40% people of Central Asia. When genetic studies were carried out, the same M17 gene was found existing among 30% Hindi speakers of North India. 30% Hindi speakers living around Delhi. Basically, blood samples were taken from the Hindi speakers living around Delhi at a point. And in these blood samples, it was found that those Hindi speakers had 30%. 30% of those people had the same gene, that is M17. But the same gene was found to be existing only among 10% of the Dravidians. Same M17 gene was found existing among 10% of the Dravidians. So basically, when people migrate, the point is genes keep getting transmitted from one generation to other. So this genetic evidence which we have now also points to the migration of the people of the Aryans to India from Central Asia. So this, kindly remember, we have genetic evidence, we have a linguistic evidence, we now have archaeological evidence which now points that perhaps Aryans migrated into India from from Central Asia. That's about this theory. In fact, many times many questions were asked from this topic. So um, uh, kindly go through this lecture once again if you wish to. So this topic is very important. You can read the same topic from NCERT. That's all for today. See you in the next class. Thank you.